I'm not going to say cheated.
The players are part of the game, they're stakeholders. The clubs don't like troublemakers. No one knows how much Khabib was fined because he knows that I would lose my contract.
Getting out of the system guarantees that you don't get protection.
If you're sending your kid to a private school to train, the set of rules and regulations this school has to comply with as an academy or as a school is magnanimous. You cannot imagine how much it is.
Today in Monday Legal, we have our guest, Karim Abaza. Welcome, Karim. Good morning.
Morning, Ahmed. Thank you very much for hosting me. It's a big pleasure to be here with you on Monday Legal.
Karim is the General Counsel of Al Jazeera Sports and Cultural Club. Karim, can you tell us a little bit about what do you actually do in these sports contracts? What does it include? Do you handle the contracts between the players and the club, or the other contracts that you handle as well? I imagine there are many, but I would like to know from you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know from where to start, but yeah, definitely let's take the football side as well. So yeah, the contract between the player and between the club, which is, I would represent the club in that case. The player is simply signing some sort of an employment contract, similar to the employment contract signed anywhere in the UAE, however, with a very specific clauses to complying with the regulations governing the football business specific or the football industry itself. So the clause or the contract as a contract, it include all of the standard clauses that we do have: a duration, term, salary, notice period, everything. And then you've got the contract between the clubs. So because if you're acquiring a player from another club or even loaning a player or offloading a player, you need to have a contract signed. And all of those contracts, even the contract for the player, the contract for the club, and the contract with the agent that brought that player or the agent representing the club, because the FIFA, they've got a regulation which is governing the FIFA, which is governing the agents, the football agents specifically, that they need to be representing the player or the club. So 3 types of contracts when it comes to any transaction. All those 3 contracts need to be uploaded on the FIFA TMS, which is the transfer matching system, where really FIFA has to look through it and approve the transaction. So it's a very regulated process. And then you've got also the sponsorship contracts, which are usually signed between the club and between the sponsors, between the private businesses that would like to invest more into the sponsorship. They would like to buy the back of shirt, the front of shirt for the full season, or even sometimes they would like to feature their name around the facility when you have their names on the signboard, on the LED screens. Even on sometimes on some of the private, I would say, merch for the players. So, for example, you might find a player who prefers to wear a certain perfume. So the player himself, he would sign a sponsorship. Sometimes the players, they approach us in order to help them with that. And even the club, sometimes they do it for the players as a good incentive for them. And then you've got all of the other associated contracts with respect to the sports itself. So the venue leasing, I mean, if you're leasing a venue or if you're leasing a stadium to a third party, there's a contract involved. When you are offloading, I would say, we talked about the offloading. When you talk about certain services that are supporting the football. So if you are going to ask a certain person to travel like to another country to watch a player for you, that's called a scouting contract.
Yeah.
So service providers as well. And then you've got all of the other standard contracts that we know, which is simply the maintenance of the pitch, maintenance of the stadium, facility management, employment contracts with the staff. I mean, like any other business.
Yeah.
But in the sports specifically, the 2 significant ones are the football transactions and the sponsorships, because they are in the core of the football business or in the sports business in general.
I saw in your answer a few words that I would like to ask. You have the players, you have the scouts, you have the agents, and you have the lawyers, there's a lot of people involved.
Yeah.
And when you said that they are regulated, each one of them have separate regulations. And for them as a professional, do they have a register, for example, that they register as a scout? And where does this register fall?
Yeah. So definitely they are. So if we take the players themselves, now the FIFA, they launched something called the FIFA ID. So each player has his own unique ID. And this ID is linked to his electronic passport, which is not the personal passport. It's called the electronic player passport. So the player cannot move from a club to a club without using that passport, which has all the clubs he trained at, all the places, when he was first registered, what was his previous club, but it doesn't include a lot of financial information about the player, how much he used to earn, or.
So it's like a professional background.
It's a professional background of the player. And also the player, if he is going to get transferred from a club to a club, this has to happen through the same regulated process. It has to happen from a club which is registered with as a professional club, or maybe as an amateur club in any of the divisions. And if it involves an international dimension, so the player is transferred from a country to a country, this has to go through another platform with its own set of regulations. So, and the clubs have to get, if a club actually is in a certain way, would like to do such kind of transactions, they need to make sure they are having the license to the professional license every season in order to be able to enable to transfer a player. And you have to pay all the dues, all the payments, everything overdue, nothing outstanding. Otherwise, you might get because some of the clubs, they might have a transfer ban. So, yes, when it comes to the clubs is the first stakeholder that needs to be heavily regulated, and they are heavily regulated by the FIFA regulations and by the confederations, by the Continental Confederation that is managing that area. So, for example, in Egypt, the CAF, which is the African Confederation, Football Confederation, is managing the entire continent, entire Africa. And then under that, they have the level which is called the Local Football Association.
Yeah.
Here in the UAE, they've got the UAE Football Association as well. They represent the FIFA jurisdiction in the UAE. When it comes to the Asian Confederation, the jurisdiction over the clubs has been managed and regulated here by something called the UAE Professional League Association, which is the association managing the professional league. And this is the body that gives you the licensing every season to compete. Without that license, which is again another level of compliance between audit, governance, legal, sports, facilities, security, media, name it. It's a manual that gets issued every year. The club has to be fully compliant in order to get the license to play in the professional league. Asians, of course, they are the very important stakeholder because they represent the clubs when it comes to or represent the players when it comes to acquiring a player by a club. And they have to be now registered by the FIFA through a certain platform. They have to sit for an exam, like the bar exam. And this, they have to get certain credit points. And they have to make this kind of reporting on a regular basis to the FIFA on the transactions they do. Scouts, I don't think there is anything that is regulating scouts as a scout. However, the technical qualifications in order for you to pay or to get any scout, you need to be technically qualified to do that. So a lot of people, their
activities must be regulated contractually, and the scout himself, in order to be able to be paid as a scout, you don't need to go through the FIFA regulations, but again, you will go through the local regulations here. So this scout has to be like having a license in the UAE, for example, to do some kind of football consultancy business. Yeah.
Otherwise, if you try to pay a person who just says, I saw that player, you won't have any money left. Because everyone sees a good player somewhere.
Yeah.
You've got also the other part, which is the coaches, which is very important.
Yes.
3-4 years back, coaches were never regulated under the FIFA regulation, or were not properly regulated under the FIFA regulations. The coach was just having an employment contract like any employee. However, the nature of his business mandates stability, a certain level of stability. So the FIFA, they enacted a new regulation, also protecting the coaches and the relationship between the clubs and between the coaches. So it's a very, as I told you, it's a very regulated behavior. It looks simple on the TV, but honestly speaking, at the backside, it's quite complex.
We've seen a lot of pressure from the media on the decision makers in football clubs and sports facilities in general when it comes to behavior or legal liability of one of the players outside, because the private life of sportsmen can put them in trouble, as he said. Someone is sued for whatever reason. Someone is involved in I don't know, igniting a media controversy. And does the sports contracts for players regulate that part, what they do in their private life as well? Because it does affect the club. It does affect your the profitability of the game or the legal aspects of the contract. Do you put terms in the contract to regulate this part.
Yeah, big time. We definitely try to draw the thin line between the private life of the player and between the professional life as a footballer. But again, both are linked in a certain way. If a player is actually is drinking, or he's simply consuming drugs, or he's not fit enough because he's been spending a very long hours at his nightlife. Again, if he doesn't show up on the training, penalties will apply. If this continues, the club may have even a higher level of disciplinary actions, which is up to the termination of the contract, and also termination of the contract for something called for just cause. The most important thing is to make sure that the player has been called, he's been heard, he has the right to appeal any decision. But again, yes, the clubs, they do protect, because the athlete, again, he didn't sign to be available with the club 24/7, but his lifestyle and his mandates requires him to be fit, to be healthy, to turn up to the training ready to train, which is the obligations that he should have. And if he's under the influence of any drugs or alcohol during the training, it's definitely a big issue for the players.
We've been talking about the professional players and the football clubs on a bigger level, but does the sports law regulate the sports facilities as well? Because, for example, you're representing Al Jazeera Sports and Cultural Club. What about the common people, the users of the facilities? What is the liability of the facilities, or the liabilities of the common users toward each other if something wrong happened, if one of the users of the sports facility abuse the location and do something wrong in it, or damage the facility, and the other way around? What's the responsibilities of the sports facility towards its members?
It's a very, very important question, Ahmed. Really, it's a very, very well thought of question, to be honest. And again, it's I would break it into two parts. So, for example, if we take a private facility like a gym, if someone is going to the gym, he signed terms and conditions, goes into that facility, and something wrong happens to him at that facility. A machine broke down, something that caused him damages. Usually in those terms and conditions, you will find something called that you're training here on your own responsibility. However, this facility would never get any kind of license or a permit to operate without making sure that they have a public damage, or we call it a public indemnity insurance, and even individual insurance, and they would never be able to operate. So they've got maybe third-party insurance, comprehensive insurance against normal risks, but they will also have the personal indemnity insurance, because they are operating a facility that involves interaction between people and machines. However, at the same time, again, you need to see what you've signed for. You may find like kind of a waiver from your side that you will not claim any, you would simply waive all your rights with respect to claiming any personal liability if you did not follow the rules. So if someone likes to deadlift with 250 kg, which is, I know people doing that. I was doing this till to a certain point, again, and he breaks his back, the facility cannot be responsible. The facility would tell him simply, you're training at your own responsibility, at your own risk. But if someone is just walking around the gym and something wrong happens, a machine just breaks down, and it cost him, it caused him kind of a
severe injury
or something, they would definitely have the liability to treat the person. They have their own facilities with the first aid kit, next hospital. They have a protocol. And here in the UAE specifically, whether it comes to Dubai Sports Council, Abu Dhabi Sports Council, even Sharjah Sports Council, the rules and regulations with respect to that, in addition to the rules of the regulations of the corporate bodies here, the Department of Economic Development, the municipality, are very, very strict. When it comes to the other side of the facility itself, so let's, for example, take the stadium. If a fan is going into a stadium to watch a football game, it's an entertainment venue that has rules and conditions, terms and conditions. And when you buy that ticket, you agree to abide by those.
Absolutely.
If the fan simply decides to leave the fans pit and to jump inside the pitch, and then he get injured over there, then he simply broke the rule, and he caused himself, as if that the person, he I would say deliberately decided to get injured because you're not supposed to be on the pitch.
So it's like getting out of the system guarantees that you don't get protection.
Exactly. And also as well, those facilities, the stadiums, for example, the set of regulations when it comes to civil defense, when it comes to security, when it comes to health and safety, when it comes to the way you are putting things, even when you put the bottle of water, if you put a bottle of water somewhere, you might get violated. You may get fined for it. I mean, not violated, but you will get a big fine for it.
Yeah.
If the unauthorized people are having access to certain places, then you get fined as well. So it all depends on what you're signing on. Read the terms and conditions. Make sure that you check the facility before you go. And at the same time as well, the facility or the owners of the facility or whoever is running it, as a gym, for example, they have to compensate in a certain way the person who gets an injury due to their default. So again, you will go back to the same concept that we all know of liability and tort.
Who's responsible?
Who's responsible?
Yeah.
So we'll go to the tort law, like, who's responsible, who it was, who did the mistake that consumed the other person. I mean, again, as it is here. One last thing also, what about a football player? You signed up a player for like, I would say, a number of millions, and the player just comes to you and he gets injured. How would the club simply be able to escape that loss? Because you've paid him already.
Yeah.
And he got injured due to a reason related to work. Maybe he gets injured due to a reason of speeding up outside of the training because he's driving his Lambo and he decides to speed up, so he made an accident. Again, here you would draw the line. Whose fault it is? Is it the player simply doing this on a personal status? Maybe he's driving his Lambo and he lost the balance and he's on the way to the training. This even makes it more interesting. Simply the club could cover up, because all of those professional players, they need to be insured. You need to insure them against any kind of injury that happens to the player, any kind of something, or I would say a damage that happens to the health of the player, or the player is not available to feature with you for a certain number of games during the season. Insurance can cover part of the salary, but they cannot cover the full salary, because some clubs, they really go crazy with what they sign and what they pay for the players, but they cover part of it. But again, you have to draw the line between whether it's something that happened due to a personal fault from the player side, or it's something related to the business or the work itself, like us.
Have you ever seen players complain, and they have the right to complain, that their peers have different conditions? I'm saying this especially for the young players who are new into the game, and they get kind of, I'm not going to say cheated, but they're going to be taken for a ride. Let's put it in a nice way, by not knowing their rights or their potential. So they get a very bad contract.
Yeah.
Do they have any way out of this, or is there any legal way that they can rely on, or they might be locked for, 4 or 5 years with a very bad contract?
Me being representing the club, I won't give the solution. Now, I'll answer you that. And again, thanks a lot, Ahmed, for that question. It's a very important question. A player, when he signs a contract like an employee, as we said, but with a specific nature, even they use the term of a special nature contract. So it's an employment contract. If you sign based on a certain terms and conditions, then you are bound by those conditions, unless some of the conditions or the conditions, they are, I would say, contradict with an applicable law or regulation. So we sign, I don't think it's just only 22, but I mean, you have the roster open for you. Sometimes you can sign up to 30 players, because again, you sign professional players, depends on the season. So 25, 30, depends on the squad room or the squad list you've got every season. If a player signs on a contract and he comes with his peer, same level, and says, okay, but he's signing on that and I'm not signing on that. Again, it depends on the terms and conditions and regulations. I might be giving a player an advantage in his contract, but I'm not giving it to his peer. And I might be doing the same thing, because again, it depends. The players are part of the game. They're stakeholders, and the most important stakeholders of the game. Because again, they have to be paid, I won't say fairly, but because also you're bound by certain I would say, thresholds. So there's something called the salary cap. When it comes even to the local players here, you have to comply with the salary cap. Certain number of players can pay that much. Certain number of players could pay that much. And it's regulated, and you have to make sure that this is happening. It's not like, you can move around it in a certain way or try to maneuver it in a certain way. So, but most of the clubs, they've done something very, I would say, very smart. They categorize the players into categories. So you've got a player who's an international player, and he's also featuring for more than 90% of the games every season. He's an important player. He's in a peak age. So this is actually category A. So internally, they put their own regulations to make sure that there is a hedge, or there is a cap, there is a threshold, a minimum and a maximum. And the players, they start moving all the way up the ladder from that category all the way up to the top category. So this somehow creates the equilibrium between the players, not the perfect equal system, but it creates this kind of balance. Can a player legally walk out from the contract? No, unless there is a violation. Because again, some of the players in a certain way, they tend to create the situation where the club is simply to abuse in a certain way the clauses of the contract, or to abuse the contract, and the clubs as well do the same. Because again, they are trying to break off a contract that seems to be in its nature unbreakable. But at the same time, both parties need to really consider the merits and the privileges being offered to each of them by the regulator. Under the FIFA regulations, for example, if you terminated the contract of a player prematurely for an unjust cause, which is also equivalent to what we know in the labor law as arbitral dismissal, then definitely, if the player done so for an unjust cause, or the club, then the party which is the damaged party, or the other party, not the non-defaulting, need to compensate the other, maybe even up to the contract, to the end of the contract, or up to the full contract value. So it's serious. Even when you get that example of club trying to take a player for a ride and tell him, you know what, sign on that, and then later we'll do it. Again, the player, he's deliverable to you under that contract as a performance. So I would really consider it very carefully if I go to take a player and say, look, let's do a deal, and let's make sure that you sign for that. And I actually be a clever lawyer, because the player is going to pay you back in bad performance. You would pay the player less than what he expected in a certain way, or less than what he signed for. I mean, apart from being cheating the player, or simply violating his rights, his contractual rights, his personal rights, again, you won't get the performance. You cannot force a player. One of the score. And one of the very, very important things that the people sometimes miss, if you're Zinedine Zidane at the World Cup and he didn't score that penalty against Italy, people think that the federation, or even if he's doing that with a team, that the team can punish him. It's not possible. This is the only area, unless he commits a misconduct, but this is the only area in the football which is the players are totally privileged and protected. And even no matter how the clubs or the coaches, they try to put as much as they can of influence on the players, that if you don't score, if you don't pass, if you don't listen to the coach instructions from the outside, we will penalize you. It's a very risky area to go. However, technology came here to help them out. So a player need to wear a GPS device. He's a defender, or he's a right winger, or he's a striker. You know what? You've got a minimum number of kilometers you need to do or minimum distance that you need to cover every game or every training. Your weight need to be perfect. Your jump height, I think in a certain way, we know that you're doing 2 meters. If you're doing less, then there's something wrong. We take you to the clinic. So it became also less abusive from both sides.
Okay. Can you mention in a contract that a player have to score a number of goals, otherwise he will be in default?
No,
that's not possible.
Cannot. Because it's a factor. It depends on other factors.
Yes.
But if the player comes to you and say, look, I need to play at least 50% of the games of the season to guarantee that, and you agreed on it, if he plays less than 50, you give him a reason to terminate the contract. Even for the club, if the club asks the player, and that's an important clause, a player cannot come and say, I'm retiring from football today. You know what? I'm not going to continue. because you can still put a clause in the contract, despite that it raised some controversials. Earlier during the days that a player, it's against his personal rights to force him to play. But yeah, it's a contract. He has to respect it. So you will find a lot of those gray areas where really lawyers and scholars and people who studied law or advising sports law, they just tap in, they plug themselves into that and they start doing the interpretation. And Court of Arbitration for sports, the CAS, is, I would say, the most important jurisprudence here. If they rule on one case with a certain ruling, then this becomes like when you do it with the Court of Cassation. It's like kind of the top level, and it could be hardly challenged.
Yeah, as a precedent.
Yeah.
In our audience, we have a lot of legal students and a lot of fresh grads and a lot of people who are starting their career. And I'm pretty sure they would like to learn from you. How would they become a sports lawyer? How can they pursue this career if someone is interested?
Thank you for the question.
Please, we want the recipe.
It's actually, the thing is that the sports law, like maybe a few years back, I won't say a long time back, but there was a very limited ways of getting access to the sports field. And people they feel that they're debarred from going into the sports field because they don't know the way. Should I apply to a club? Should I actually study law? Should I sit with footballers? Should I sit with agents? They don't know the thing. And the solution was found by academics first. So since a long time back, you've got lawyers who got themselves involved in sports because they love it and they learn it by practice. So this is actually like kind of a segment. And then the academics, a lot of universities, they launched their own programs, which are specifically talking about sports. And they make it as a master's program, specialized diplomas. Even sometimes it's a 1 week course to that extent. And it really gives a lot of access to information, regulations, and even to the network itself. You've got even universities that gives bachelors now in sports management and in sports law. FIFA themselves, they have their own specialized program, which is mainly in football law. The Court of Arbitration for sports, they're launching their modules as well to grasp a bigger number of talents and of lawyers to get in there and study what is the regulation and how to apply it. So you can have that also as a second segment. The most important segment is the practice.
Thank you very much for coming and being with us, Karim.
It's my pleasure, Ahmed. Thank you very much for having me.
We really enjoyed today.
Likewise, to be honest, it's a pleasure. It's a big pleasure to be with you. And as I told you before, I'm following your steps since a long time. You know, our relationship goes way much more back. So I saw everything. You saw me when I was an associate.
Yes.
You interviewed me as a role one day as an associate.
Long ago.
So I definitely, I'm definitely highly looking at you. You've done something unprecedented here in the market.
Likewise.
Network and people and the level of experience. You're very notable as a lawyer around the community of the lawyers, and definitely it will continue. I'm sure you will do a lot of great things.
Thank you so much.
So thank you very much for having me today. It's actually a big pleasure, and I'm honored.
Thank you. This is your dose from Monday Legal. See you next week.